Hi, my name is Nicola Brown and I'm a textile artist living and working at Clasheen in rural southeast Ireland. During this video, I'm going to share with you the step-by-step process as a new felt maker of creating a beautiful piece of flat felt. I'm going to use merino wool as my base. This is actually a natural undyed wool from Portugal. It's approximately 24 microns, so it's not the finest wool. So this will be my base, and I want to select one or two different embellishing fibres so that I can share how I would lay them out and include them on the surface. So when I'm selecting the colour of the fibres, I'm just looking. Here, these first fibres, these are silk. The black is quite how would I say, it's not exactly dull because it's going to shine on the surface, but it's sophisticated. It's not going to cause a really big reaction. The green has more contrast, so this might be more obvious against the surface of the wool. Something that also looks like silk, and it's very, very shimmery. This fibre is tencel. This is actually made from eucalyptus. It's a man-made fibre made from plant material. So if you have an issue and you would prefer not to use silk, which comes from the silkworm, it's their cocoon, maybe you would prefer to use something like tencel. This here is Silk Throster's waist, and actually I particularly like this against the grey, and I think in combination with the black that would be a very sophisticated colour scheme. So if I was making a scarf, for example, or something to wear at night time, this could well be what I would choose to use. I might also include a small little bit of this shimmery fibre. This is called Firestar. It's actually tri-global nylon and it's very, very shimmery on the surface of the felt. However, what I wanted to share with you now is the impact of a contrasting colour. So if we say I'm going to use that beautiful silk with the grey, what would happen if I replace that with orange? And for me, this combination really pops. The orange and the grey are contrasting colours. I actually like them with this as well. And I have an orangey yellow silk fibre here. So this particular fibre is silk tops. It was actually cut there, but usually it would look a little bit longer. So I think I'm going to put those with the grey, and I'll also just put a little bit of this on just so that I can share the technique for you of how I would add it, and I'll put those out of the way for future use. As a beginner felt maker, I always made my own soap and water solution, and I actually used a soda bottle with holes cut in the top of it, or a milk bottle, to sprinkle that solution onto my felt. One of the tools that I highly recommend that you invest in as you progress through your felting, through learning the felting process, is one of these. This is called a ball browser, and I will put a link to this in the video description below. This is the most wonderful tool. So to use this, I would squeeze air out of it. I would put it upside down and I would let it draw up the soapy water into the bulb, and then I can sprinkle it very evenly onto my fibre. That's if I go down the route of using the soap and water solution. However, what I particularly find helpful, and this was not taught to me at the beginning when I started felting, I find it particularly helpful to use a piece of old net curtain, or sometimes called a felting net. And you'll see as we go through the felting process, I'm going to be laying this net down if I demonstrate felting at any stage, and I'm going to be applying my soap through this net. So this way I can actually have a very accurate knowledge through experience of how much soap I am putting onto my wool. If I make the liquid solution up, it works very well, it's perfect at the beginning, but I don't know for sure how much soap I'm putting onto my wool and my fibre when I'm felting. So this is my top recommendation. This is a recommendation if you're a beginner and you haven't got one of these, just make up a soap and water solution and then use a milk carton or something similar that you punch holes in the top of to sprinkle that onto your fibre. I'm always careful when I'm adding hot water to soap. You might notice that I have a ceramic bowl. Do not do this in a plastic bowl. I've seen too many people having accidents. I'm pouring warm water from my kettle, not quite on the boil, but really warm. I'm going to give this a stir, and I'm just going to let the warm water dissolve the soap. I always have a linen tea towel and a regular towel to hand when I'm felt making, because it's good to keep drying your hands when you're dealing with the fibres. Don't necessarily get your hands too wet. And the tea towel, even though this one looks stained, it is actually clean. This tea towel is marvellous for finishing your felt, and that's going to be a little tip that I'm sharing later in the video. As somebody who is moving towards the most sustainable textile practice possible, I really try to avoid using plastic in my studio. However, there is no doubt that the easiest way of learning to felt is to work on bubble wrap. So what I actually do, and for the purpose of this video, I have some bubble wrap that's come from packaging when I've got something, and I'm going to cut this. I'm going to use a slightly thicker bubble one. I'm going to cut this and form the base, 2 pieces of bubble wrap, the base and the upper portion, and I'm going to felt between the 2 layers of bubble wrap. So while I try not to use plastic, I do save all the bubble wrap that I get, and it is wonderful. In the future, if you decided to omit plastic altogether from your practice, you can work on bamboo mats or blinds, and there are implications with everything. So I prefer to upcycle and recycle things where possible, and I find that the bubble wrap is the easiest thing to demonstrate on, to use, and also it's easy to access. Now, if you live in America, you may be familiar with solar pool covers. Dear me. So solar pool cover is a cover that you put on top of your swimming pool. It's got a rigid flat plastic surface, and the other surface is like this bubble wrap, except the bubbles are a lot firmer. And I do know that quite a few of my friends in America choose to use the solar pool cover. However, I have tried it. It definitely would last a lot longer than bubble wrap does. The bubbles wouldn't burst in the way that they can do with the bubble wrap. However, I personally don't like using the solar pool cover because it's not flexible enough for me. You're going to see as I'm felting that this is really flexible, and I'll be rolling my felt up within this, making a package. And if I'm making sculptural felt, I like to have that flexibility from the bubble wrap. So as a beginner felt maker, I highly recommend that you cut your 2 pieces of bubble wrap out to the same size, and don't try and fold it over and work with just one larger piece of bubble wrap. Definitely as a beginner, it's much easier to work with 2 separate pieces. And if you think of the bubble wrap as if it is the bread, and your wool fibre is going to be in the middle here. So think of the wool fibre and your embellishments as if they are the filling in a sandwich. And the more even the bubble wrap is, the easier this is going to be to roll when we get into the felting process, and you're going to find the whole thing very much easier. Let's start laying out the fibre. So I've actually got a coil of fibre here, the wool roving. I've just taken a manageable length from my big bundle, and I'm ready to go. I pull my first shingle, I put it down, top left. And as I move along, I'm trying to overlap each shingle of fibre slightly with the one beside it. Note that this underneath piece of bubble wrap has the bubbles facing upwards. So as I lay the fibre out, I'm trying to pull even shingles. This doesn't always happen, and it's more difficult, I have to say, when I'm talking. And you might notice that I am leaving a border around the perimeter of the fibre, and this is because when I wet the fibre it's going to move out a little bit, and so it's important not to lay the wool too close to the edge of your bubble wrap. Once the first line is laid out, you then lay a second line, and in this case each shingle of fibre overlaps the previous one, but it also overlaps these wispier tips that are above it. So try and get into a rhythm. Don't stress if your fibre is a little bit uneven. If you're new to felting, of course, it takes time to practice all of this. I continue laying out rows of fibre, and then for the very final row near the edge of the bubble wrap, I rotate the shingle and I position it in the opposite way to the others, with the finer tips facing inwards and the slightly heavier edge facing outwards. This will help give me a more even outside edge to my finished felt. Don't be afraid to position dry hands down on top of your fibre once the rectangle is laid out. And should you feel any area that is significantly lighter under your fingertips, just add a few more wisps of fibre. I've now got my first layer of fibre laid out. I squeeze the air out of my bowl browser, and I have hot water in this bowl which I am allowing coming up into the bowl browser. This is where you can use your liquid soap in your pop bottle if you prefer. After the bulb fills with water, I leave it for about another 20 seconds because it continues to take water. And now I'm going to lay sprinkle the water on the fibre. I like to start on the top left hand side and work backwards and forwards following the direction that I laid the fibre. But one thing to note, it's better to do a fine even spray rather than squirts. So, ready to go. Turn it up and just moving my hand slowly, I go back and forwards on the wool. So after I've put the water out, you can notice that some areas are a bit spongier and some the water is pooling. That's normal. Don't be tempted to add more water now. What we're going to do is add our soap now, and once the soap has been added, determine if we need a little bit more water. So I have my soap beside me and my net. And very carefully I just position the net on top of the wet fibre. And using the soap, but not putting much pressure, I very carefully add a very light layer of soap on the wool through the net. And just note, I'm not going like crazy. I'm just doing this gently, and I'm supporting the package with my left hand. Of course, if you're left-handed, you can do that the other way around. And once I've put a fine layer of soap everywhere, I just put my hands down and I just give a little bit of a rub through the net. And at this stage I can tell that here needs another small bit of water. It's a little bit spongy. So I'll just add the water through the net. Give a rub, and that feels good to me. So it's not very sudsy, but there's a little slick of soap on the felt, on the wool, which is going to become your felt. Now I need to peel the net off very carefully. So I like to work from the narrower end. I just put the wool fibre back down on the bubble wrap. And keeping my hands low, I peel the net off the fibre. And at this stage I like to do something that I call sweeping the edges of the fibre in. So I just go carefully around the outside using 4 fingers. And I could rotate the whole package if I wanted to. And I can see that this needs a little bit more water there. So I've laid out my first layer of fibre, and now I need to lay my second layer at right angles to the first. One of the easiest ways of doing this is just to rotate your whole package, give your hands a really good dry, and then start laying out your second layer of fibre exactly the same way as you did your first. Just remember that the final line of fibre, the final line of shingles, you're going to turn your hand, rotate the shingle so that the thicker top portion is at the edge of the design or the layout. This just means that you have better edges to your piece. So I've now laid out my second layer of fibre. All the fibre is at right angles to the first. I can see it's a little bit light at the top, so I might just add a couple of extra pieces of wool there. But overall, I'm happy enough with this layout. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to wet it, I'm going to net it, and I'm going to soap it. Gently rub down through the net. If you don't have a felting net, just use the soapy water solution and your soda bottle and just press down with the top layer of bubble wrap. And then when I peel the net back, I need to be careful that the wool fibre stays down rather than getting stuck on the net. When I take the net away, I sweep the edges in again. And now I'm ready to add my embellishing fibres. I'm keeping this extremely simple. This is for demonstration purposes to show you. And I already decided earlier on that I was going to use some silk tops or roving, some of this upcycled material, and some silk throwster's waste. So I'm not going to worry about this too much, but it's important to understand that these fibres by themselves do not felt. They need the little barbs that are on the outside of the wool fibre to grab hold of them so that they actually combine in the piece. So it's important not to lay these too thick or they just won't combine with the wool. So I'm just going to tease these out. And with the wool or the silk roving or tops, I'm going to sort of pull it out, almost make it look a little bit like fire. When I started felting, I was always told you couldn't put your embellishing fibres on wet felt, that you needed to put dry on dry or wet on wet. But that actually is not true. If you have a little bit of soap and water before you add your embellishing fibres, what will happen is they will stand out more in the finished piece. Another advantage of using soap before you put the fibres down is if I put them down and I don't like them, I can still lift them up. And one final tip. Should you want to make a design almost paint with your silk roving. If you take a piece of the roving, you can tease it out a little bit. You can actually dip this in your water and then it becomes much easier to make shapes. So maybe I'll just make one circle down here at the bottom, or a spiral. I'm just going to leave that very simple. That's what I'm doing for the embellishing section, and I'm just going to put a small bit of water on top of that. I'm going to put my net back down. I'm going to put a little slick of soap on top of the embellishments. And now what I'm going to do is just give a very gentle rub over the whole layout through the net. If I feel my hands rubbing a bit too hard against the net, it means I haven't enough soap. But that's something that you may not realize at the beginning, so don't stress about it. If you can see a small slick of soap, that's sufficient. I peel the net back, and let's just have a closer look at these embellishing fibres before I start the felting process. So looking at the embellishments, this swirly bit down here and these strands here, those are the silk roving or the silk tops. This is the unidentified man-made embellishing fibre, and this here, this white area that could be confused for just soapy felt, this is actually the grey silvery throster's waste. So this actually is also silk. It looks like it's just soapy, but it is silk as well. And I'm going to give a final check around the edge of the piece to make sure that any very long wispy pieces are pushed in. And now I'm going to lay my second layer of bubble wrap on top of the fibre. Bubbles down. So when I do that, I press it down to make good contact. And the next thing I do is I add a little bit of water on top of the bubble wrap. I put a very light slick of soap on top. And I'm just putting enough soap so that my hands are wet and they slip gently on the package. And it's very important to understand that the calmer you are when you start felting and the more gentle, the quicker the fibres will tangle together and your felt will happen. So don't be aggressive. For example, you don't want the bubble wrap moving like that on the felt, on the fibre. You want your hands to slide gently on top of the bubble wrap. So I'm going to start in the top left-hand corner and I count to 10, but up and down is 1. So I'm going to count to 10 here, 10 here, 10 rubs here, here, here. Each time I rub, I overlap with my fingers and I want to cover the whole of the package and I want to do 10 rubs everywhere. At the edges, I make sure that my fingers go over the edge of the plastic, such as here. And what this is doing is the bubbles in the bubble wrap and the very gentle pressure from my hands and the motion is helping the fibres start to tangle together. But this process takes time, but the longer I do in the rubbing stage, the less rolling and more physical work I will have to do later. It's important not to skip this, and it's important to do the same amount of rubs everywhere. because there is no shortcut to felting. When I've done 10 rubs everywhere in this direction, I usually just go round the outside and then I peel back the bubble wrap. So what you are going to see now is you're going to see the depressions from the bubbles in the bubble wrap. You're going to see that some of the fibres at the outside of the package have actually gone out a little bit. So I like to go around with my fingernails and sweep those edges in again. And I replace this bubble wrap. Whoops. Okay. I press down everywhere and very carefully I turn the whole package over. So the easiest way of doing that is to work from alongside. It's to hold everything very firmly and turn it gently and just put it down. And once I turn the package, I push down on the felt and then I peel this side off. So this is the first time we're actually seeing the wool on this reverse of the piece. And I need to do the edges again. And you can see how some of the soap has come through from the other side. There's more soap there than here. But for the moment, I think everything is looking good. So what I'm going to do now is add a little bit of water on this side, a little bit of soap. And I just repeat by doing 10 on this side. I can feel my hands aren't moving enough, so I need a little bit of soap. Now that I've given 10 rubs in that direction on the reverse, I lift it back, sweep the edges in again, and you can see the impression again of the bubbles from the bubble wrap, and you can also see that this package is a bit whiter there from the soap and not as much there. So at this stage, if I wanted to add any more soap, I would just put a very small bit on through the net or sprinkle a little more soapy water on it. Let's see how that looks. So that looks more evenly soaped. Bubble wrap back down. Carefully turn the package over. I'm back looking at the first side again, the side with the embellishments, but now what I do is I rotate the package, lift the bubble wrap, so every time I lift the bubble wrap, I check the edges. Put the bubble wrap down. And now I'm going to do the 10 rubs, but in this direction. Don't be tempted to rub too much with the bubble wrap down, because if you do you're going to not have such good quality felt afterwards. You want to keep lifting it and repositioning the bubbles in a different place. Turn it over. And then work on the back end side again. Now already if I put my hands on this, I can actually feel that this is starting to come together and form a fabric. As a new felt maker, I was never encouraged to do this early on, but I actually enjoy that. And I can see that already I could lift this up and it is forming a fabric. Now at this stage I could choose to stop the process, or I could do a little bit more rubbing, stop the felting process, dry this piece, and then I could cut this piece up into shapes and use it in a future design. And if I chose to do that, this would be called pre-felt. However, I want to felt this fully. As I think the wool is starting to felt with the neighbouring piece of wool, I start to apply a little bit more downward pressure with my hands. If I put my hands on the fibre, I always make sure that they are wet and soapy. I'm just having a little feel to see what's happening. And this is definitely already starting to come together. If I see any area at the edge where there's a big curve in, I can just pull it out a little bit, because the felt is still very flexible. It's not anyway finished yet. Try it back to the first side. And each time I turn it, I push down to make sure that the felt is now secured to the bottom piece of bubble wrap. Then I peel it back carefully. And at this stage, I want to sweep the edges in again, but I actually think I could add a little bit more soap in that area, and I could pull that out a bit. So very carefully, I'm teasing the outside edge to try and get it as even as possible. So I'm going to put the net down. It's a fine act between having your felt too wet and too soapy. It's always easier to add more. I also like to work through the net at times and feel everything under the tips of my fingers. So you can try that too if you have a net. And I can feel that that corner there needs a little more soap. My fingertips were grating on the net. So at this stage, the fibre, the wool fibre, is meshing together to form the felt, to form the non-woven fabric. Now, when it goes a little bit further in the process, it won't be possible to pull the fibres apart. I probably could pull them apart now, should I choose. And also the embellishments, these orange and the sort of grey silvery fibre, that's not fully integrated with the wool yet. So I have to be very careful to be delicate with this at this stage. So we've already done 10 ups and downs on both sides in that direction and 10 in that. So I'm going to rotate this and go back to just repeat the whole thing again and do 10 in this direction. before I move on to rolling. This is definitely all starting to come together, so I'm going to just give it a little bit of a rub with my hands, nice and soapy. And under the tips of my fingers, I'm just feeling whether I can feel the bubbles in the underneath piece sticking up. Feeling whether my hands are slipping or if they feel like they're grating. If they're grating, that means I need a little bit more soap. And they were grating slightly here, and I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see, but that corner there looks very slightly darker, for example, than this corner. I think that corner there needs a tiny bit more soap. So in this case, I'll just add that soap with my hands. And I'm going to try and even the shape of the corner. And now that corner is the same color as the others. See what the front side looks like. Lovely. So everything is coming together. Interestingly, this was the corner that was down near me on the other side, and again, it doesn't look on this side as if it is quite the same amount of soap. But let's just have a feel. You need to be very careful if you're putting your hands directly on the side with the embellishments, because you don't want them to lift off the wool. So if you're unsure about doing that, just put the bubble wrap or your net back onto the fibre. I'm going to do one more series of rubs on this side, and then we'll move on to the rolling process. So when I move on to the rolling stage of the wet felting process, that will cause the fabric to shrink. So wet felting comprises of two phases that combine to form wet felting. So the first phase, ironically, is called felting, and that's when the fibres start to tangle together, as they have, to form non-woven fabric. And the second phase is called fulling, and fulling is the shrinking process. So this fabric, this piece of felt, the fibres have all started to really combine very nicely, and it's already formed a piece of non-woven fabric. But without the fulling or shrinking stage, this is not going to be as stable as it would otherwise be. And it wouldn't be considered felted. So for example, if this was a scarf that I had laid out, and if I finished it now, what would happen would be if somebody went to wash it, it would just shrink dramatically. Or if somebody went to use it as some functional throw or something, it might start to come apart a little bit. So we need to have this all come together and form a solid piece of fabric that it won't be possible to pull apart. And at this stage in the process, when I now move on to rolling instead of rubbing, it can be easier to sit down. So I'm going to, whoops, I've got my phone there. That's what I'm going to do. I like to lay out standing up, and depending on the height of my table, I often roll sitting down. Now, I've got my towel that I've been using to dry my hands with, but this is also very handy for helping keep the package together. So it's important when I roll my felt that I roll it firmly but gently. And as you can see, this top piece of bubble wrap is starting to move forward. That's normal. Don't be nervous of that. And when I have that rolled out, should I choose, and I often do because it's often easier, I will just put that roll on the towel and then I will roll it up just a little bit, and that helps keep the package come together. And when I roll, back and forwards is one roll, and I'm putting no pressure down on the package. If I put pressure down, it goes flat, and that way I can roll ridges into my felt. So I'm going to be going back and forwards in a rocking motion without pressure, and one with my fingertips up and coming back. So back and forwards is one. And I'm going to start rolling with my hands in the center of the piece of felt. And I'm sure you noticed that I rolled it from a narrow side up to the other end, but I will be rolling it from both sides and in both directions. But I always like starting from one of the narrow ends. So I'm going to go back and forwards for 10. I'm going to move my hands out a little bit and do 10 and out again and do 10 rolls. And at that stage, that's only 30 rolls back and forwards. I will open the package, check that everything is all right, and we'll see what's happened. So here I go. Nine, 10 in the middle. 10 there. Now I move my hands out further. And at the edge of the package, I can feel that's flattening a little bit. So that's sufficient for now. I'm just going to open this up. So each time when I open it up, it's very important. Remember I said before that the bubble wrap is like bread and the felt or the wool fibre is like the filling in a sandwich. It's very important when I open this up that I end up with the two pieces of bubble wrap, like the sandwich, like the bread, and the fibre in the middle. It would be very easy, and I see many people unrolling like this and they end up with no bubble wrap on the top of their piece. So try and avoid that mistake. Just think that the bubble wrap, one piece of bubble wrap always is on either side of your fibre. And for me, I actually like to turn my piece often when I open it, but let's just keep it simple. Let's just open it like this. So this is the way I rolled it up. I'm going to remove the top piece of bubble wrap, and already as an experienced felter, I can see that this is starting to shrink. And can you see here the way there's almost a little ridge? So I can pull that, and the inner piece of the package, if you think of a jam Swiss roll, this is like the inside bit of a spiral of jam. There's always more pressure here than on the other end. The piece of felt on the outside of the package has less pressure than the inside. And for that reason, when I turn it over, I'm then going to be rolling from this side down. So each time I rotate it, I change which piece of the felt is in the middle of the package. I keep checking the edges. And the best quality felt is made by stretching and shrinking. Don't be afraid gently to grab hold of the outside of your felt and to stretch it. And I'm going to repeat the rolling process on this side. Remember that that upper piece of bubble wrap will move. I also find this is a hand towel. It's best not having your towels too large for this, unless of course you're working on a very large piece of felt, but they become awkward. So 10. Remember, if I open it like that, I've no bubble wrap on top, so identify which is the top piece of your bubble wrap when you open your package up. I'm going to just stand up, and already it's definitely shrinking. So surprisingly, believe it or not, this won't actually take that long to finish, and I can even lift it up to turn it. And in the same way that you laid different directions when you were laying out the fibre and that you rubbed, you then rotate so that you're rolling in this direction. So I'm going to have to rotate my towel as well. As I feel the felt getting firmer under my hands, I can now start to put pressure down and it's not squashing as much. So it always fascinates me how quickly the fibres come together and actually form a piece of fabric. Can you see what's happened this time? The felt is really shrinking in this direction, so I need to stretch it in the direction I've been shrinking it. I need to work on the edges and turn it over. If I'm making an exhibition piece, I do have some tips for more experienced felt makers about having more even edges and stabilizing the felt. And I would also use snub nose pliers to pull the fabric and make sure that it was as even as possible around the edges. But for your first few pieces, it is very nice to have these organic edges too. So don't stress about it too much. Just do your best at getting a nice, successful result. So I'm going to just do the rolls in this direction, and then I'm going to give you my top tip for actually shrinking the felt more and finishing it beautifully using a linen or a cotton tea towel. Give a few extra rolls here because I can feel it's not flattening too much, so everything that tells me that everything is coming together. Okay, so I'm going to take it out of the towel. Remember, within the bubble wrap. And I'm not sure if you can really see, but this here has definitely really started to shrink in this direction. The whole package is narrower than it was, or the whole piece of felt. So I can be quite firm with this now. And a fantastic tip for finishing your felt and for shrinking it, this hasn't had the full shrinkage yet, but it's actually to roll the felt on itself and to put it within a linen towel. And in a minute, I'll also be heating this towel with hot water. But to start with, I'm going to roll the felt up on itself. Don't be nervous of this. When you can see that it's clearly coming together. If you have any doubt, my recommendation is that you do more rolls within the bubble wrap. I'll just do this first one on the bubble wrap. You can also put a hand at the edge, which will help even up your edges. That's a bit more difficult. So when I open this, I don't think you're going to hear it, but I can actually hear. It's almost like Rice Krispies or puffed rice in America. The fibres from this side are almost felting there, and I can hear as I open this, it pulls away. Now I'll do it in this direction. And this piece is actually fairly close to doing a big dramatic shrinkage and finishing. So I'm going to put it in this tea towel, which, as I say, looks dirty, but actually it's just stained. You can have it directly on your table or on the bubble wrap. And I'm now putting pressure on this. I can hear that. I'm not sure if you can hear that, but this is really coming together. And I think it should be obvious this time if I just hold this up and you look at the size of the bubble wrap, how it was before, this is really shrinking. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to roll it from side to side in that tea towel. And I wouldn't be over happy with this edge of my piece. That's to do with the layout. I've got a bit of a piece sticking out there and it's not very even. I can work the edges directly on the bubble wrap before I do this next roll. If you look at that now, I've actually worked the fibre in. So I worked the fibre in this direction, which is where I wanted it to shrink. And what was a big loop, I've worked either side of the loop, and now that's actually much more even. I could do something similar with this end up here. So those sort of finishing touches are what you start to learn and understand more when you felt more. So now I'm going to roll it on itself and then in the towel. And pretty soon we'll put some hot water on it and do the final work. Let's get rid of this. So it never ceases to amaze me how soft and fluffy fibre, the wool, the silk, different embellishments, how within a relatively short space of time, with the friction from my hands, the soap and water helps, but with the friction from hands, how they can then form one very, very, very strong non-woven fabric. And felt actually is the oldest fabric known to man. You can see how much this has shrunk in that direction. So I can be very aggressive in my stretching now. And ideally, I would like to work this until it doesn't stretch anymore, until there is no more stretch. I'm putting loads of pressure down now. So you can really see it's curling up. The wool has actually got a beautiful texture. And I would like to just give this a good wash in hot water, but it's not quite finished. I'm going to give this a good wash in hot water. I'm going to wipe my table down, and then I'm going to give it some rolls in this direction and this direction just to finish it off. But I'm going to do that without the soap. But I'm sure you can see, like I can actually pull this really firmly, and this is not going to ever come apart again. So I would consider that this is almost finished, this particular piece. And the embellishing fibres have really felted in. When they're wet, they're not quite as visible. When these are dried and I'm going to iron the piece to give it the final finish, they will shine and shimmer on the surface. But for now, I'm just going to go to the bathroom. I'm going to give this a good wash in hot water and I'm going to come back. It'll take me 2 minutes to finish the piece then. And I will wash the table down with clean water. I'll get a clean tea towel and 2 minutes, this will be finished. So I've now washed my felt in very hot water and I can see clearly that all the wool has come together and the fibres have really, the wool fibre has felted with the embellishing fibres, and even if I pulled at these, they are not going to come off. So I can just actually give this a little bit of a roll in a dry towel just for 1 minute in this way, and that will actually take a little more moisture out, but it won't be until after I iron this piece and do a final stretching that you're going to see the sheen from the beautiful silk. So all my felt, whether it's, well, any type of felt except for very strange shaped sculptures, I would always iron them at the end just to finish them, give them that finishing touch. So I'll just go this way. And if you're making felt pictures, you may well choose to stop the process a little bit earlier, but for me, I like to make sure that there is no more, there isn't a lot of shrinkage or no shrinkage left in the pieces, because I want all my work to be functional. Or art pieces, but I still don't want them deteriorating with time. So I think it's possible to see that the Throster's waist, that's the whiter colour here, it's really felted in well. This was the silk fibre, and you can see it's all looking curly now because as the wool was shrinking, the wool was grabbing hold of the silk. And then just down here, that's that other fibre that I actually am not quite sure what it is, but I know it's a man-made upcycled fabric. So this is my piece of demonstration flat felt. I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you, and I hope it gives you confidence to go ahead and to actually felt your own pieces now. So have fun. If you have any questions, please drop me a comment in the video description below, and check out my other videos and tutorials. I look forward to seeing you in a future video. Over and out from Cláistín.